Playwright and poet Ntozake Shange came to prominence in the early 1970s with the choreo poem For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. Shange's work came at a time when the civil rights movement was still fresh in the minds of Black Americans. Shange was one of the first Black children to integrate into the St. Louis public school system when she was only 5.
Trying to make it real, but compared to what? Slaughterhouse is killing hogs.
Radical leaders like Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party raised the profile of Black Americans who believed there were other ways besides nonviolent resistance to fight for your rights.
Are kissing dogs, and I hate that human love, that stinking mud.
There was a tremendous change in the attitude of this country, particularly from politicians' standpoint, about what we ought to do with reference to Black people. Black people lost politically on the school question. Black people lost politically on the housing question. Black people lost economically on the job question, all in the 1970s, and it was all at the same time that the incredible increase in numbers of Black elected officials. And so for the 1970s, for the decade of the 70s, from a Black political perspective, I think they were probably far more bleak than the 60s.
American unrest continued to grow over the seemingly endless Vietnam War, which became another arena for the unfair treatment of Black Americans. While they comprised 10% of all Vietnam troops, only 5% of sergeants were Black.
It's the rich people. It's the people that don't have to go in. The people whose sons don't have to go in. And that big business is behind the war. That is generally understood as that the reason you're there is because some rich people want to use you and you're poor. If you weren't poor, you wouldn't be there. I mean, if you had a father who was a businessman, you wouldn't be there.
Dr. Martin Luther King spoke out against the Vietnam War in a piece entitled America's Chief Moral Dilemma. He said, "Somehow these three evils are tied together, the triple evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism."
Army, retired. I'm taking in 9 Purple Hearts, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Army Commendation, and a lot of other shit.
Meanwhile at home, the civil rights movement helped animate the women's rights movement, which had started in the early 1900s. In 1972, Congress approved the Equal Rights Amendment.
It's been almost a decade since the women's strike for equality, the first sex discrimination suit, and the Supreme Court's landmark decision prohibiting firms from refusing to hire women with small children unless they also did the same for fathers. Our consciousness has been raised, our bodies reclaimed, but the fight for equality is far from won.
This experience, which Black Americans were having, did not go unnoticed by the rest of America. Something had started that was beginning to spread, a new kind of pride, identity, and consciousness that was about to turn the mass movements of the 1960s into new and different forms of activism.
Now, we fought the public accommodations fight 10 years ago with the blacks. Are we going to have to start all over again with women?
How about, would you like a sign up there that said blacks only or whites only?
It's the same principle, sir. Women are persons. Women are people.
Persons, and we want to be able to come and go through it, and we don't want to be intimidated by signs that say men's buffet.
I have no intentions of taking the sign down or changing the sign. If you can get a court order to take it down, fine.
You have no intention of
No.
changing your policy of
No.
segregated facilities. Is that correct, sir?
If you women are that hard up for a glass of beer, I'll be glad to serve you at the bar.
And that's when women suddenly understood that their own personal history was significant. And that's where the phrase, the personal is political, came from.
Equal rights to set forth our own humanity, equal rights to get into graduate programs, to get into schools, to training programs. We're the bottom third of the employment in terms of pay. We represent, nonetheless, 34% of the workforce, yet we're the first to be laid off and the last to be hired. They aren't frivolous demands at all. We just want what men have had all these years.
The end of the 1960s and the early 70s also saw an explosion of black music and culture. Funk groups like Sly and the Family Stone and soul singers like Diana Ross, Roberta Flack, and Nina Simone all changed the landscape of black American music. In 1958, Alvin Ailey founded the first all-black dance company, the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. Perhaps Ailey's most famous work, 1960's Revelation, uses spirituals, gospel songs, and holy blues to explore grief and joy in the soul.
Mother, 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 save your child.
At the intersection of activism and art were the black poets and spoken word performers of the 70s, including Audre Lorde, Maya Angelou, and Amiri Baraka. Many spoken word artists released albums with jazz or drum music behind their speech. This new medium influenced the underground hip-hop movement growing in the Bronx.
Things gonna get greater later when sisters get in their place and black men stop making manhood a disgrace. When brothers stop acting like food.
If it's slow, it's because we slow.
Too.
You understand that? But the minute you put yourself away from the people, no matter how backward and corny you might think they are, then you are isolated, standing there by yourself, and you will get killed. You will get killed, and it's not about being killed. Liberation is not about being killed. We are not interested in no suicide. We want to live. We want a new life. We want a life that we remember vaguely sometimes in the back of our heads as a liberated African people.
On the porch outside my door, young girls are lying like felled maples in the path of my feet. I cannot step past them nor over them. Their slim bodies roll like smooth tree trunks, repeating themselves over and over until my porch is covered with the bodies of young girls.
In the theater, however, the roles being made available to black actors were still very limited.
What I was most concerned about in black theater is that the kinds of characters we get from so-called European theater don't exist for us. We may be able to say Raisin in the Sun. We cannot say Ophelia or Macbeth. We cannot say Willy Loman. Those are the kinds of things I want to see. I want to have a character I can keep with me for the rest of my life. I do not want to know about a street in Harlem. I want to know about a family. I want to know about the child, the father, the mother, the aunt who comes by from wherever she came from. And those are the kinds of things that I don't think we started getting until the last 4 or 5 years. And that's why I think maybe something has happened now where we really do accept the fact that we are human beings no matter what white people do to us.